My name is Stephen Pritchard. I work for a company called Onyx Point. Onyx Point does a lot of things, but we specialize in consulting and contracting. We're big on Puppet and RHEL and GitLab and lots of other things, but especially in the federal space. And we are also the maintainers of SIMP. So, apparently the clicker that was working a moment ago is now no longer going to work. All right, so compliance standards. Compliance standards are like all other standards. If you haven't seen this XKCD, I think it sums it up very nicely. Yeah, so yeah, there are 14 competing standards. We need one standard to rule them all. Now there are 15 competing standards, right? So that's how that works. With compliance specifically, though, there we go, got it to work. Part of the reason for it is that there are different compliance standards depending on what space you live in, right? So how many people in here have to deal with federal compliance of some sort? NIST 853, DISA STIG, that sort of thing? All right. How many of you are in commercial space where you have to deal with PCI, DSS, maybe SOX? Medical, HIPAA, anyone? Yeah. Anyone here from Europe have to deal with GDPR or anything like that? Not from still have to deal with it even though you're in the US? Yeah, yeah. So all of you are very aware of the pain this brings. From a systems standpoint, if you're dealing with compliance, it really honestly it comes down with dealing with auditors, right? What you end up needing to do to get your systems compliant is one of really three ways. First of all is to have a golden image, right? So you've probably all had, you know, an instance template or a VM template or a you know, a Kickstart configuration or whatever that when it's done, you have a compliant system, right? The problem with that is it was compliant when you started it up based on when it was built, right? So these things drift over time. If you've had systems that are long running, you know, just because they were compliant when they were started doesn't mean they're compliant later. If the rules change, like anyone who's had to deal with PCI, if you went from, you know, PCI 2.0 to PCI 3.0 or whatever, you know, the rules just change out from under you, right? So what the systems need to have to be compliant evolves, and you know, you're stuck with a golden image of fixing the golden image and then redeploying the world, you know, which is not fun. So another way to do it is to have some scripts or maybe you know, an Ansible playbook or something like that, where it's like, you know, I'm going to apply this to all my hosts and they are going to magically be compliant. Well, the problem with that is if you don't know what the baseline looked like, then it's really hard to get that right and not break things, right? You end up with the same problem that you had with the golden image also, that over time then it's just going to drift, right? So if you didn't break stuff when you initially deployed it, 6 months later, year later, you know, when the next audit rolls around, it's not necessarily going to be compliant. So another way to do this is repeated application, right? Having a compliance baseline that you apply on a regular basis. That is honestly the hardest way to do it, because you've got to handle all the variables, right? And it's got to you know, it's got to evolve as the systems evolve. But the good news is, you know, if you're compliant now, you can still be compliant in 6 months. You can still be compliant in a year. The system that you just spun up will be just as compliant as the system that you spun up 5 years ago, right? So, inner SIMP. SIMP is a Puppet-based compliance framework. It was designed for government enclaves, you know, like in SCIFs. So it actually provides everything that you need to build a compliant infrastructure. I forgot already. How many of you deal in government? Kind of if you can imagine one of these areas that's off network, that you can just walk in with a CD image or a DVD image, right? SIMP on a disk will let you build everything, right? So it's kind of cool. It has mapping to the various industry standard compliance rules, whatever, and it has a reporting mechanism as well built in. So, and it is 100% free and open source software. So it has full support for Red Hat and CentOS. It uses Puppet for automation, but it doesn't preclude using other systems for other things. So SIMP solves a lot of the complexity of technical compliance, right? So it implements those rules in code that these various compliance standards require you to do. Everything from, you must have a login banner that says these words, and you have to set automatic logout times to this, or whatever, right? There's a million of these things, and SIMP actually handles all of them. So you get to focus on your mission or your business, as the case may be, and you can worry about your security and your applications and so on and so forth, right? Anyway, SIMP actually came out of the National Security Agency. So if you go to github.com/National Security Agency, camel case like that, /SIMP, there's a page on SIMP there that has some information about it. But like I say, my company, Onyx Point, is the maintainers of SIMP, and we've actually grown the product out of what the NSA released a few years ago. If you go to github.com/SIMP, you can see all the code. So everything's there. A lot of Puppet, a lot of other random bits. So you might wonder why Puppet. I happen to be a big fan of Puppet, and by the way, if you are interested in why I'm having a Puppet Birds of a Feather session later on this evening, if you look at the board out by the check-ins, they've got the rooms those are in. I also have a Vim Birds of a Feather session if any of you are crazy enough to be into that kind of thing. I actually have a talk tomorrow on Puppet too, so if you're really interested, then you can come to that. The thing about Puppet is, in a normal configuration, Puppet runs every half hour. So if you have all of your compliance built out with Puppet code, any system that drifts for whatever reason, somebody logged in and did something, somebody applied a patch, somebody did whatever, it will get fixed within a half an hour. So that's great. Puppet, if it is able to compile, like if the code is intact, you don't have any syntax errors or anything like that, if it's able to compile a catalog, it will apply the catalog in whatever order it can. If you have a dependency that's messed up for some reason, it's like unable to install a package, it may fail that branch of the dependency tree, but it'll do everything else, right? So it won't just give up at the moment that it hits an error. And so that's important for security and for compliance as well. It's better to be 98% compliant than not at all, right? The Puppet DSL is generally considered pretty easy to understand by people who don't necessarily program. It does give you a lot of flexibility to do programming things in it. You can do conditionals, you can do iteration, you can do lots of things in the Puppet language, but you don't necessarily have to. The default with Puppet code is to just kind of just describe resources, packages and files and things like that. There is a Ruby backend for Puppet, so if you really need to do something fancy, you have that option. Whoops. I talked too long. I apologize. Anyway, for like I say, for people who want it, there is the Ruby backend. Although it's it does kind of restrict, people can't just go completely nuts with the Ruby code. With SIMP being based on Puppet, you have all of the resources that you would have with any other Puppet installation. So all the random modules on the Puppet Forge and things like that. So, speaking of random modules on the Puppet Forge, the core of SIMP is a bunch of Puppet modules. As of the time I took this screenshot, there were 90 modules on the Forge under SIMP. So if you're into Puppet, you actually can consume the individual Puppet modules that constitute SIMP, and just go nuts with it. And SIMP is managing lots and lots of things. So there are modules on the Forge for everything from AT to ClamAV to NFS. This isn't even a complete list, right? So like I said, there's 90 modules, sysctl settings and TPM and, tons and tons of stuff, right? One of the pieces of SIMP, that's really interesting is the compliance engine. So the way SIMP was originally designed, it was designed around all these Puppet modules, and it just kind of in code had implemented all of these compliance standards, right? Well, in code they implemented NIST 853. Well, when they want to implement DISA STIG, well, that maybe has slightly different rules. And then when they want to implement another standard, these all have slightly different rules. Some of them have some one-to-one mappings, but not all of them. So what they've started to do is build this data layer that will map the compliance standards to a set of Puppet parameters. So it can supply, if you say I need DISA STIG, well, that implies a set of parameters to the various Puppet modules. If you need NIST 853, that's a different set. The cool thing about this, though, is that it's a generic thing. You can use the compliance markup module, which is actually where this is at. It's compliance markup. You can use that in any third-party module. So if you do any Puppet code, or if you've got homegrown Puppet code and you want to implement compliance, you actually can do that in a way that will work with SIMP or work without it. You can just provide the data in your modules to do everything. In the compliance engine, the module is called Compliance Markup. I think we're renaming it to Compliance Engine, I have to watch myself because I stumble over that. Apologize. The way it works, you build out profiles and you list the various controls. Those controls are then mapped to checks, and if you look, it's type Puppet class parameter, and we list the module name and what the parameter and value are, right? So it's just a bunch of data, and we've already done this again for NIST 853 and DISA STIG, and the company that I work for does have a commercial product based around this that adds on Windows support and some other compliance profiles. So but we do, like I say, we do open source all of the core pieces. So anyway, then the last part of the compliance markup thing is reporting. So what compliance markup lets you do is basically have with the checks, that tells you, like what parameters things should have. And what it'll do then is it can generate a report to tell you anything that wasn't in spec with those parameters that you previously defined. So anyway, it's It's kind of cool because, like I say, you not only get the compliance, but you also get the reporting out of the same module. Okay, so all that's great if you're into Puppet, but if you're not, and you just want to get started with the product, with the project, there are really 4 ways of installing SIMP right now. The easiest and kind of blessed way of doing it is via ISO, because again, originally SIMP was built for these enclave environments that are off network, right? So you walk in, you drop in the CD, you boot up, it builds a whole entire Puppet server with Yum repos for all the packages, with a Puppet server, and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of components, and it actually builds. It actually includes DHCP and TFTP and all the bits that you need in order to kickstart other systems in a compliant way. So all the systems that you kickstart off of that will have the disk layout that's required by DISA STIG, so on and so forth, right? Of course, that's great if you're in a absolute greenfield environment, right? But if you are like me and you've never actually worked in one of those environments, you might be interested in one of the other ways of installing. So the way SIMP is built, on the ISO, it's a collection of packages and some scripts and things like that, and you can actually install the packages on an existing system in order to get essentially the same effect. So if you are like me, though, and you are accustomed to having a Puppet environment that is pre-built, there is a way to install using R10K or Code Manager. And for those of you who don't know Puppet, that's a tool that will do code deployments based on Git repositories. So, and it's kind of the standard way to do things in Puppet. So that's an option. It does require some knowledge of Puppet to do it that way, but if you've already got a Puppet environment, I would assume you probably have that. So the last way to do it is with a cloud instance. If right now there's an AMI in the AWS marketplace, you can spin up and you can get a SIMP server, which again, the same thing you'd get off of the ISO basically, but it's already pre-built for you and ready to be configured. I know we have guys who are working on building an image for Azure right now, and I think the eventual goal is to get something in GCE as well. So whichever cloud platform you like, we'll hopefully have something there for you. So, some gotchas if you do decide to jump in with this, I want everybody to be aware of. By default, we have SE Linux enabled and enforcing in targeted mode, okay? Mandatory access control is a wonderful thing for compliance reasons as well. FIPS, on the other hand, I don't know anyone who's a fan of FIPS, but yeah, but it can be enabled. FIPS is awkward if you're not familiar with FIPS. It is a requirement for a lot of the government compliance, but basically it sets a flag on the kernel command line, and basically all of your crypto libraries are then supposed to call into kernel code for the crypto algorithms. So you have to have support for this in OpenSSL, GNU TLS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in like RHEL 5, a system with FIPS mode turned on often would barely work. RHEL 6 was a little bit better. RHEL 7 is actually remarkably functional. It's kind of shocking. But yeah, so that's a thing. You just need to be aware of it. And it's really easy to turn off if you just don't have time for all that noise and you just want to just tell the auditors that you're not going to bother. But yeah, so that's the thing. IPtables, host-based firewalls, turned on by default. only for inbound connections, not for outbound. Outbound's just allowed. I've seen notes that the intention was to turn on outbound IPtables as well. I don't know where that's gone. I think I forgot to mention, I've been with Onyx Point for about a year, and I've been working off and on with SIMP for that time. So I'm kind of the junior guy on the team really at this point. So I don't quite have the deep historical background on some of the nuances, but if anybody's got any questions or anything, I'd be happy to go ask people who know more than I do. So then the last thing that SIMP implements is a thing called SVC Kill. And what SVC Kill does is basically stops any service that isn't being managed by Puppet or whitelisted in the SVC Kill configuration, right? So again, for compliance, can't have anything running that's not supposed to be running, right? So there is a mechanism in SIMP for handling that. So I got a little example here talking about how to, once you've got SIMP, things are pretty locked down, right? So, but you still need to be able to run applications. So you need to ask what services need to run, what users need to be able to log in. So that's not for just like run user where things are just run as another user ID, but specifically for where somebody needs to be able to SSH in or somebody needs to be able to run sudo, right? And then what inbound ports need to be open. So like I was saying with SVC Kill, that won't kill any service managed by Puppet or in the ignore list. So it's probably impossible to see, but I have an example over here. There's a SVC Kill ignore. You can list services there, or you can just manage the service with Puppet, and it will be allowed. And it doesn't go randomly killing processes on the system. It just stops services that are running that aren't explicitly enabled. And then for account access, the way SIMP works is all user logins are disabled by default. You have to whitelist any user that you want to allow. You can do it, and this is there. It'll actually add PAM access rules on the system. Okay. Now you can do it with, you can manage those lists using groups that are in AD or whatever. If the system's configured to use Active Directory, that's fine. LDAP, you can use LDAP groups, or you can use local users or groups. But you do have to whitelist everything. So, so that's a little different than probably what you're used to. And then IPtables. It does allow SSH by default and ping, but everything else is blocked. I think they would love to block SSH and ping out of the box, but I think it just breaks so many assumptions and the ability to manage things remotely once they've come up. So it just yeah, like I say, by default, those are allowed. And then, like I say, there's no outbound blocking because again, that just breaks so many assumptions. That's a tough pill to swallow for most people. And there's already quite a few of those in SIMP, so they left that one alone. So the complete example, you'd end up for this random application. You'd basically say where you wanted to allow connections from. You do your normal package service kind of stuff. You'd allow an app user, and then IPtables. You'd set what ports you want to allow and where from, and then in your data you'd list any networks you wanted, and just make sure you were classifying with your this profile class that you built. So I I blew through that way faster than I intended to. So I have lots and lots of time to answer questions. But if you're interested, you can just go to simp-project.com. There's documentation at simp.readthedocs.io. And then the company I work for is Onyx Point, and it's at onyxpoint.com. So, questions? Absolutely. Sorry. Anyway, questions, anybody? Somebody's got to have questions. Yes.
I don't know if you can answer the question. So if you're not that, like, you run into people who are ready to turn on that outbound blocking, on their installation for
in any place I've worked, so the places that are in real strict compliance environments, they completely accept that they need to have host firewalls, right? That's not even, nobody argues with that. Like at my previous job, I had trouble convincing people that we should even do that, right? And we were bound by PCI, DSS, and SOX, and I don't know what else. But everybody wanted to say, firewalls are the security team's problem. They're not our problem. So we're not gonna have firewalls, right? And I'm like, that's dumb, because that's not the reason you have host-based firewalls. I mean, yeah, sure, it protects you from stuff coming in from the outside, but it also protects you from other things on that network, and it means that you know what's actually running on the systems, right? That's more important to me. Anyway, the host-based firewalls really aren't that big of an argument, and I know, and every place I've worked, they're perfectly fine with the perimeter firewalls doing egress filtering, right? They're perfectly fine blocking all outgoing traffic unless it's whitelisted, right? But I have yet to see anyone who is totally cool with the idea of just blocking by default outgoing traffic from the system, yeah, and I will admit that one would be hard for me, even, just because there's so many considerations involved, but it's probably not a bad thing, again, if you're trying to be secure. And actually, it's the funny thing is, I forgot to work it into the slides, but I do always like to point out that compliance is not the same thing as security. Often, yeah. So a highly compliant system is not necessarily a highly secure system, and vice versa. In fact, I know one of the rants that Trevor, one of the guys the guy who built most of this, who's one of the owners of Onyx Point, Trevor goes on a rant periodically that there were what were at the time considered insecure crypto algorithms that they were forced to configure things to use, because that's what the standards specifically listed. Even though everyone else had moved on, the standards hadn't caught up, right? So in order to be compliant, you actually had to make the system slightly less secure by allowing older crypto algorithms. Actually, by forcing older crypto algorithms, which was kind of crazy. So anyway. Yeah, but long-winded way of saying, no, I don't know of anyone who's like totally gung-ho about the idea of blocking all outgoing traffic on all systems, and so. Yes, sir. By the way. Yeah, so here, I'll give you one of these too. So let me go back to that slide. Let's see here. I got to find it. So, like I said, this is specifically around the compliance markup module. When you implement these parameters as, when you map Puppet parameters to individual compliance controls. Then what it will do, and again, this is terrible because you can't see this. What this does is it will actually list the compliance profile name and a summary of how many things are compliant, how many things are non-compliant, et cetera, and then it will tell you the class name, the parameters, and like which things are actually compliant, which things are non-compliant, and it will actually generate that system or that report on every single system. And that's all built into that compliance markup module. It just works. Now, again, it does build the reports on every system. So you'd need to have a way of collecting those up. So on and so forth. We also have a Puppet module for managing like OpenSCAP. OpenSCAP, whatever you want to call it, and we have some stuff for building like dashboards around SCAP scans and things like that. So there's other reporting pieces that you can add on, but like say out of the box you get this kind of for free. This just with no effort, basically just by enabling the compliance markup thing in the Puppet and in the hierarchy, and then applying the class to all the systems. This just happens. Any more questions? Yes. Yes, actually, that's something that the guys on contract are really proud of. They have every single thing that goes in goes through some fairly rigorous testing, and gets deployed out of the CI system. So here you go. One of the nice things is that's all built in to Puppet, right? So that's a common thing with Puppet is to do there's a unit testing framework that's based on RSpec, which is came out of Ruby on Rails. There's an acceptance test thing called Beaker that's used to actually like spin up VMs and apply a class and do testing that then uses server spec, which is a chef thing actually, in order to test that everything works the way that you intend. And actually all of those modules that I was listing all have pretty extensive testing suites. So it's actually pretty, relatively speaking, it's pretty easy to get to do that. If you wanted to set up SIMP, you can do it and actually build it into a CI/CD pipeline. So, yeah. Anyway, I saw another hand up over here. Yes, sir. Yes. Sort of. Here, have a Nerf dart. Whoops, sorry. So Trevor's actually spent quite a bit of time trying to understand the tasks and plans, and the initial implementation of that, because they announced Bolt about a year ago. Really, honestly, let's be realistic. The idea was to have Ansible for people who are doing Puppet, right? I'll talk more about this at my Birds of a Feather session tonight and the talk tomorrow, but honestly, what Puppet does with maintaining state, like say running every half hour, whatever, is great for laying down a baseline. But things like Ansible and Bolt are great for the periodic like one-off tasks or things that have to affect multiple systems in a certain order or whatever, right? Puppet announced Bolt a year ago, and Puppet tasks. They built it into the Puppet Enterprise console. It's actually pretty slick for doing little one-off things. But the initial release of it, they had plans which would let you just assemble tasks in a certain order or whatever. And the tasks were scripts that would just were written in any language that could take JSON as input and out and spit it out as output. That way, all that could be plugged into the console. the thing was you couldn't actually do Puppet with Puppet tasks and plans. And relatively recently, they added the ability to actually apply a Puppet manifest directly from a plan, right? So now you have a way of doing the one-off stuff that also integrates some of the code that you're using for laying down that baseline, which would be great for getting bootstrapped, or for when you want to just trigger part of your your whole Puppet stack, like on a like you're doing patching or a deployment or something like that, right? So that is now technically possible, whereas it wasn't 6 months ago, 3 months ago, actually. Again, very long-winded way of saying no, not really, but I expect that to be a thing in the near future. So I'll go with you first. So you get that for free with Puppet. Puppet has a no-op mode, so you can put nodes in no-op, and it will run. It will report what it would do, but it doesn't actually do anything. So SIMP doesn't actually even have to do anything special to support that. There you go. I missed slightly. Sorry. So no, you wouldn't have to do anything. Now, the thing about doing like applying everything in no-op is that it can get a little weird when you've got dependencies. So like this has to happen before this thing could happen, before this thing could happen. It may only report the first thing in that chain. It may not necessarily report everything else, depending on how everything ends up getting laid out in the catalog. But yeah, like say. For the most part, though, I mean, this is the standard way to bring in something like if you're brownfielding this would be, set up the SIMP server, which Puppet server with all the SIMP code, and then take an agent node, get the Puppet agent installed, set it to no-op, and classify it with the SIMP class, and then run the agent in no-op mode, and just see how badly it blows up, and then iteratively fix things until you get it right, And then usually what ends up happening is you take it out of no-op mode, and still a couple things break, and then you figure out that for your environment you need this or this, Yeah, brownfielding SIMP, I'm not going to lie, is not the most fun thing in the world. Brownfielding Puppet in general, taking systems that exist and getting them all consistent, is a minor nightmare. Now you take that like up a degree of magnitude, when you start talking about making, like every last little thing compliant. So, anyway. You had a question? If you go full bore with SIMP, yes, you get a whole entire Kickstart environment, and yeah, it's everything. Because again, the idea with SIMP originally was, you plop down a disk on a server in a skiff, and you fire it up, and then you have everything else connect to that, and it does DNS, it does DHCP, it does TFTP, it does LDAP, it does I forget what all else. Too many things, right? That's actually that's a thing that's had to evolve over time, is actually being able to not turn on all those things. Right? SIMP's only been open source for a few years, I think since 2015. So it's still fairly rapidly evolving. But yeah, it is totally possible now. I actually just was working with a customer and got SIMP up and running with basically the server not knowing anything about SIMP. So the Puppet master, and they were running Puppet Enterprise. We made no modifications to the Puppet master other than just dropping the SIMP modules on there, and we were able to get everything working. Took a little bit of work, and we had to disable a couple of things that would normally be turned on, because there's a few things that need server-side help to happen. SIMP includes a really simple CA, so you can actually like generate certs for like if you've got like web servers and things like that. It can generate the certs for those. So rather than just having self-signed certs on the box, you have a CA of that's a private CA on the server, and it generates the certs for all the agents and pushes them out, and so they get the same cert for all the different services and whatnot on the system. But that requires server-side support, right? So I had to turn all that stuff off. But again, that was coming at it from the complete opposite direction, like total brownfield, trying to work it into a someplace that already had Puppet Enterprise. So anyway, throw one of these at you too. Oh man, I'm just not very accurate with these things. Luckily, they're soft. Nobody's gonna get hurt. Yes. Yes. So actually, the Windows implementation is actually pretty awesome because it was built from the ground up to use the compliance engine. It is mostly just the compliance data mapped to pre-existing Puppet Forge modules. So it uses the Windows feature. There's a Windows feature module on the Forge. There's a registry module on the Forge. I mean, there's various of these things that are, anyone who does Puppet on Windows ends up using these modules, and that's actually what the Windows SIMP Windows is actually using on the back end. So, anybody else? Yes, sir. So HIPAA is one of the profiles that's included in the commercial product, but ultimately what that just does is there's another compliance profile that maps the things that are required by HIPAA to again, actually, in most cases, the things that are required by HIPAA actually map to a NIST 853 control. So it actually maps the various controls in HIPAA to NIST 853 controls, which then have have the Puppet parameters and things associated with them. So what it ends up doing, honestly, is it turns on a subset of what you would get if you turned on NIST 853 compliance. So it just doesn't manage as much for the most part. So if you were to put this in and go full bore NIST 853, you'd probably be fine. It's just it's gonna be more intrusive than it would be if you just turned on HIPAA. So if that makes any sense. Here you go. What? Right. Yeah. If you've got, this might be one of those things you have to get security team and systems guys to talk together, and again, if you have to deal with compliance, so friend of mine, guy I used to work with at my last job. We did a lot of homegrown stuff for SOX and PCI, but we didn't have anything like SIMP in place. And I started working for Onyx Point right after he had gotten. We both left the last job within a few months of each other, and the place he went to work for, they were starting to work with government, and so he had to implement NIST 853. So he ended up going and doing all of the work to figure out, okay, what do we have to manage? What do we have to supply? They were doing Puppet, and he went through all that himself. And then I got the job with Onyx Point and found out about SIMP, and told him that he could have saved himself weeks and weeks and weeks of work, and still SIMP manages 10 times as much as what he did in order to get past his audit. So. Anyway, any more questions? Yes.
I'm just curious,
So I can't rattle off what the individual controls are, but I'm reasonably sure that either we have a mapping for GDPR or somebody's working on it. It's actually a big part of our jobs, or by our, I mean people at my company. A big part of our jobs is going through all those the compliance standards and going through and finding all those mappings and figuring out everything that has to be managed and so on and so forth. And yeah, that's actually a pretty big part of several people's jobs, not mine, thank God. My eyes go cross when I start staring at this for any length of time. So anyway, I can't answer that because I just don't know personally. But you know, somebody will. And like say if you were stuck implementing that and all you had was, you know, open source SIMP with all the NIST 853 and DISA STIG, you probably could get 90+% of the way there. I'd almost be willing to bet you could get 90+% of the way there building a compliance profile that just turned on individual pieces of the DISA STIG and NIST 853 things, which is like really trivial to do. You just basically have to map, okay, this control maps to this control, and then that control has something behind it, right? Anyway. So I forget the exact list, but I know in the commercial, the commercial product honestly is less about the extra profiles and more about the Windows support and some of the dashboards and visualizations around it. And we're working on a really cool console that's going to let you actually see what things are non-compliant and actually fix them from the GUI, which is honestly what a lot of people want, right? They don't want to have to ever go in and edit a file. They just want to, you know, point and click and see things that are red and, you know, whatever, right? And so we've got a lot of development effort going into that. And it's looking really cool, and that'll be released sometime in the relatively near future. But the extra profiles are, you know, like I say, I think I know PCI DSS and SOX and what else, and HIPAA are in that list, but I don't remember what all else. But you know, and again, the thing is, you know, if it offends you to pay for, you know, commercial, you know, versions of open source things, you know, you can, in most cases, almost every compliance standard out there does end up devolving to some subset of NIST 853 and DISA STIG. So if you go in and you turn both of those on, you're probably going to cover almost everything. You're going to be managing more than you need to, but you're going to cover almost everything. So yeah, anyway. Yes, sir. I wasn't around for that, so I can't really. Not to mention the fact that I don't have clearance, and so I'm not allowed to know lots of things. I think you're going to get my last one of these. Anyway, but yeah, so the NSA's actually got several things that they've open sourced over the last number of years, right? And it's kind of cool that some of this stuff that's grown up inside, you know, somewhere in the government has been able to be shared with everybody else. And I do know I heard a thing where government agencies are required actually now to open source a certain percentage of what they work on. So it's kind of cool because we've still got people on the inside working on SIMP who and they're open sourcing. Yeah. So I need to get wrapped up. So thank you everybody, and try not to knock that over. If you've got any more questions, feel free to grab me. I'll be around, floating around here. And like I say, I do have a Birds of a Feather session on Puppet specifically later on. If you've got questions about SIMP, you're welcome to show up for that. And then I've got a whole talk just on Puppet tomorrow. So thank you.